The stack of bills spread across my kitchen table looked like a paper graveyard of financial mistakes, and every red ink past due stamp felt like a personal insult. My name is Jaden Patterson, I'm 42 years old, and apparently I'm the kind of guy who gets to choose between paying the electric bill or buying groceries this week. Because nothing says successful adult like rationing peanut butter sandwiches while your ex-wife lives in the house you used to share. I pushed my wire-rimmed glasses up my nose and squinted at the credit card statement for the third time. Same numbers, same nightmare. The divorce had been finalized 8 months ago, but the financial carnage was still unfolding like some slow-motion disaster movie, where I was both the victim and the idiot who caused the explosion. My cramped one-bedroom apartment felt smaller every day, especially when I spread out my monthly budget ritual across the scratched kitchen table that came with the place. The previous tenant had carved "fuck landlords" into the wood, which seemed appropriate given my current relationship with rent. The phone rang just as I was calculating how many more months I could survive on ramen and false optimism. I almost didn't answer because unknown numbers usually meant debt collectors. But something made me pick up. "Jaden, man, I need your help." The voice was shaky, barely controlled panic bleeding through the speaker. Oliver Gonzalez, my best friend since we were 7 years old and the two shortest kids in second grade. "Oliver, what's wrong?" I set down my calculator and leaned back in the rickety chair. In 35 years of friendship, I'd heard Oliver talk his way out of everything from detention to parking tickets, but I'd never heard his voice crack like this. "It's my mom." His words came out in a rush. "She's got cancer, Jaden, aggressive breast cancer. The doctors say she needs this experimental treatment, but insurance won't cover it because it's not FDA approved yet." My stomach dropped. Oliver's mother, Maria, had been like a second parent to me growing up. While my own mom was working late at the school district office, Maria Gonzalez fed me countless dinners and bandaged my scraped knees after bicycle accidents. She never made me feel like an imposition, even when Oliver and I tracked mud through her spotless kitchen or broke her favorite garden gnome playing baseball in the backyard. "Jesus, Oliver, when did you find out?" "Yesterday. The oncologist says we don't have time to shop around or wait for appeals. There's this clinic in Phoenix that specializes in cases like hers, but they want $35,000 up front before they'll even schedule the first treatment." His voice broke completely. "I don't have it, man. My credit's shot from some stupid mistakes a few years back, and the banks won't even look at me." I stared at the bills scattered in front of me. $35,000. That was almost exactly what I'd paid my divorce attorney, which felt like the universe having a particularly cruel sense of humor. "Have you tried other family? What about your siblings? You know how things are with Carmen and Diego. They still blame me for the whole college thing, and they're barely talking to me anyway. Besides, they don't have that kind of money either." Oliver's breathing sounded ragged. "Jaden, you're the only person I trust with this. The only one who might have the credit to qualify for a loan this size." And there it was. The reason I'd spent 35 years being the responsible friend while Oliver charmed his way through life. I was the backup plan, the safety net, the guy who solved problems while he created them. But this wasn't about Oliver. This was about Maria, who deserved better than watching her son spiral while she fought for her life. "How long do we have?" "The clinic needs a deposit by Friday to hold her spot. If we miss it, she goes to the back of the waiting list, and the doctor says—" He couldn't finish the sentence. I looked around my shitty apartment with its water-stained ceiling and the neighbor's music bleeding through paper-thin walls. Then I thought about Maria Gonzalez teaching me to make empanadas when I was 12, how she never made me feel embarrassed about coming over every day after school because no one was home at my house. "Let me see what I can do." The relief in Oliver's voice was immediate. "Really? Oh God, Jaden, I knew I could count on you. I'll pay you back as soon as I can, I swear. Maybe I can get a second job or—" "Don't worry about that right now. Let me call my bank and see what's possible." After I hung up, I sat staring at my phone for a long time. $35,000. It would mean using my house as collateral, the same house I'd bought as a symbol of adult success and then nearly lost in the divorce settlement. The irony wasn't lost on me that my biggest asset was now the pile of debt I couldn't quite escape. But Maria had cancer. Real, aggressive, life-threatening cancer. And if I could help save her life, what was money compared to that? The next week blurred together in a haze of bank meetings, paperwork, and credit checks. I'd always been good with financial details. It was my job as a freelance consultant, after all. But navigating the loan process while lying awake at night, worrying about my own bills, felt surreal. The loan officer, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, reviewed my application with the enthusiasm of someone processing tax returns. My credit was decent enough, my freelance income steady, if not spectacular, and the house provided adequate collateral. She explained the terms with the detached professionalism of someone who'd seen 1,000 desperate people make questionable financial decisions. "Are you sure about using your home as security for this amount?" she asked, peering at me over reading glasses that reminded me of my mother's. "It's a significant risk for a personal loan." I thought about Maria's face the last time I'd seen her at Oliver's birthday party 6 months ago, how she'd insisted on making enough food for 20 people even though only 8 showed up. How she'd hugged me goodbye and told me I was too skinny, pressing a container of leftover enchiladas into my hands. I'm sure. 3 days later, I sat in the same cramped apartment, staring at my laptop screen as I initiated the wire transfer. $35,000. The number looked even more terrifying in digital form than it had on all the paperwork. I typed Oliver's account information with hands that shook slightly. This was it. The moment where either I'd helped save a life or made the stupidest financial decision of my already catastrophic year. The transfer completed with a simple confirmation message that seemed wildly inadequate for what had just happened. I immediately checked my own account balance and watched 35 years of financial responsibility disappear in a single transaction. My bank balance had gone from barely sustainable to genuinely terrifying. The number on the screen looked like a countdown timer to homelessness. But somewhere in Phoenix, Maria Gonzalez might get the treatment that would save her life. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair, hoping like hell I'd just done the right thing. 3 weeks had passed since I'd wire transferred my financial future to Oliver, and I was still trying to convince myself it had been the right choice. The stack of unpaid bills on my kitchen table hadn't magically disappeared, but at least somewhere in Phoenix, Maria Gonzalez was hopefully getting the treatment that would save her life. I'd been picking up more freelance work to compensate for the massive hole in my finances, which is how I ended up at the Marina District on a Tuesday afternoon, meeting a potential client at some overpriced waterfront restaurant. The guy owned a chain of boat dealerships and needed help restructuring his business loans, and frankly, I needed his money more than I needed my pride. The lunch had gone well enough. He'd ordered the lobster while I stuck to the cheapest sandwich on the menu, but he seemed impressed with my preliminary analysis of his debt situation. Nothing says financial expert like a consultant who orders a turkey club while you're discussing million-dollar restructuring deals. After we shook hands and agreed to a follow-up meeting, I decided to walk along the docks for a few minutes. The marina was one of those places that reminded you what money could buy. Rows of gleaming boats that cost more than most people's houses, all bobbing gently in their slips like floating symbols of success I'd never achieve. I was just starting to feel properly sorry for myself when I froze mid-step. There, about 50 yards ahead of me on a pristine white speedboat, was a figure I'd recognize anywhere. Oliver was lounging on the deck in expensive-looking sunglasses and one of those ridiculous captain's hats that screamed, "I have more money than sense." He looked completely at ease, like he belonged there, soaking up the afternoon sun without a care in the world. My stomach dropped so fast I thought I might actually throw up the turkey club. The boat was beautiful, gleaming white fiberglass, chrome accents catching the sunlight, and a design I recognized immediately because I'd spent hours researching the exact same model 6 months ago. Before my divorce turned boat ownership from future goal to impossible fantasy, I'd been obsessed with this particular speedboat. I'd memorized every specification, every feature, every price point. This one looked pristine, fresh, expensive as hell, and worth every penny of the $35,000 I'd just loaned my best friend for his dying mother's cancer treatment. I stood there like an idiot, watching Oliver adjust his sunglasses and take a sip from what looked like an expensive beer. He hadn't noticed me yet, which gave me a few precious seconds to let the horrible realization wash over me. Because this couldn't be what it looked like. There had to be an explanation. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and dialed his number, never taking my eyes off the boat. I watched him glance at his phone screen, smile, and answer with the casual confidence of someone without a guilty conscience. "Jaden!" "Hey man, what's up?" His voice was bright and cheerful, like we were just two old friends catching up. "Oliver." I tried to keep my voice steady. "Where are you right now?" "Just relaxing at home. Why?" "Everything okay?" I watched him take another sip of his beer, still completely oblivious to my presence. "Really? Because I'm looking at someone who looks exactly like you on a very nice boat at the Riverside Marina." The silence that followed lasted about 3 seconds too long. When Oliver spoke again, his tone had shifted completely. The easy confidence was gone, replaced by something defensive and cautious. "Oh, that. Yeah, I'm just borrowing it for the day." Friend of mine said I could take it out to clear my head, you know? With everything going on with Mom. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Borrowing it from who? Just a guy from work. You wouldn't know him. But Oliver's voice had that particular quality it got when he was spinning a story on the fly. I'd heard it 1,000 times growing up, usually right before he got caught in whatever lie he was trying to sell to our parents or teachers. That's funny, I said, still watching him through the marina fence. Because it looks exactly like the Monterey 224 FS I was researching before my divorce. You know, the one that retails for around 35 grand. Another pause. Longer this time. Actually, it's a rental, Oliver said, his voice getting tighter. I figured I deserved a day off after all this stress with the medical bills and everything. Nothing wrong with treating myself to a few hours on the water. A rental? I repeated the words like they tasted bad. How much does it cost to rent a boat like that for a day? I don't know, man. Why are you interrogating me? I thought you'd be happy that I'm taking care of my mental health during this difficult time. But I wasn't done. Because the pieces were falling into place with the kind of horrible clarity that made everything else in my life suddenly make sense. Oliver, whose boat is it? I told you, it's... No, I want the truth. Right now. The silence stretched out so long I thought he might have hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice had completely changed again. Now he sounded almost defiant. Fine, it's mine, okay? I bought it. But only because Mom insisted. The words came out in a rush like he'd been holding them back, and finally gave up. She said I needed something to help me cope with the stress of her treatment. Something to give me hope and keep my spirits up while we go through this whole nightmare. I felt the last bit of hope drain out of me. You bought a $35,000 boat with the money I loaned you for your mother's cancer treatment. It wasn't like that, Oliver said quickly. The money you loaned me is safe. This came from something else, from... Show me the medical bills? What? Show me the bills. From the clinic in Phoenix. Show me the treatment costs. Show me one single piece of documentation that proves your mother is actually receiving the treatment I helped pay for. Oliver's voice got sharp, angry. I can't believe you're doing this to me. I can't believe you don't trust me after 35 years of friendship. My mother is fighting for her life, and you're worried about money? I'm worried that you're lying to me. You know what your problem is. Oliver's voice was rising now, and I could hear other voices in the background. Probably other boat owners wondering what the drama was about. You're jealous. You've always been jealous of me, and now that I have something nice for once in my life, you can't stand it. Jealous. I repeated the word like it was something I'd found stuck to my shoe. I'm jealous that you used money meant for cancer treatment to buy yourself a toy. Fuck you, Jaden. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know what I'm going through. And then the line went dead. I stood there staring at my phone, watching the call end screen fade to black while 50 yards away, Oliver was probably having the worst day of his lies finally catching up with him. But all I could think about was Maria Gonzalez, who might not be getting any treatment at all. And the $35,000 that had just vanished into the marina, like everything else good in my life. 35 years of friendship, and it might have all been built on lies. I spent that weekend doing what I do best when life goes completely sideways. Research. Because apparently when your best friend of 35 years steals your money to buy a boat, the appropriate response is spreadsheets and documentation, not punching walls like a normal person. My colleague Marcus works in insurance investigations, and he owed me a favor after I'd helped him sort out his tax nightmare last year. One phone call and 20 minutes of explaining the situation, and he was digging into boat registration databases like he was hunting down insurance fraud, which, let's face it, he basically was. Monterey 224 FS, registration number... Marcus rattled off the details while I scribbled notes on the back of an unpaid electric bill. Registered to Oliver Gonzalez, purchased from Riverside Marine 2 weeks ago. Cash transaction, $34,500. 2 weeks after I'd wire transferred the money. The math was so simple a third grader could have figured it out, but somehow I'd been too trusting to see it coming. You sure about this? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Dead sure. Guy's either got terrible timing with his mother's medical crisis, or he's playing you harder than a rigged slot machine. Monday morning, I called the first lawyer I could afford, which turned out to be Janet Morrison, a solo practitioner who specialized in exactly the kind of mess I'd gotten myself into. Her office was above a dry eye cleaner in a strip mall, but she had 20 years of experience and a reputation for taking cases other lawyers wouldn't touch. You've got solid documentation, she said, reviewing the bank transfer records and Oliver's text messages about his mother's treatment. Wire transfer, stated purpose, his acknowledgement of the loan terms. Since you can prove the money was obtained under false pretenses and used for something completely different, we've got grounds for fraud recovery. How long does something like this take? Janet leaned back in her chair, which squeaked like it needed oil about as badly as my bank account needed money. Depends on how cooperative your friend wants to be. We'll start with a formal demand letter, give him 2 weeks to make this right voluntarily. If he's smart, he'll settle without dragging it through court. But Oliver wasn't smart. He was clever, which turned out to be a completely different thing. The demand letter went out on a Wednesday, certified mail with signature required. 2 weeks came and went without so much as an acknowledgement. No phone call, no text, no carrier pigeon, with an apology note. Just complete radio silence, like I'd suddenly ceased to exist in his world. Time to file suit, Janet said when I called on day 15. Fraud, breach of contract, and recovery of fraudulently obtained funds. We'll also request a preliminary injunction to prevent him from selling or transferring the boat while litigation is pending. And that's when Oliver finally decided to respond. Not to me, of course, but through his own attorney. Some guy named Bradley Pierce who probably charged more per hour than I made in a week. Pierce's response letter was a masterpiece of legal fiction. According to Oliver's new version of reality, the $35,000 had been a gift from his dear friend Jaden, given out of the kindness of my heart to help him through a difficult time. No loan, no medical emergency, no obligation to repay anything. Just one friend helping another in his time of need. They're claiming it was a gift? I asked Janet after she'd finished reading the response letter aloud. Yep, your buddy's trying to argue that you just handed him $35,000 out of the goodness of your heart, with no expectation of repayment. Janet's tone suggested she'd heard this particular lie before. Too bad for him you documented everything like you were preparing for an IRS audit. The preliminary injunction hearing was my first real taste of how the legal system works when someone's caught red-handed. Oliver's lawyer tried to argue that his client needed the boat for his mental health during his mother's illness, while Janet calmly presented bank records, text messages, and boat registration documents that told a very different story. Judge Martinez wasn't buying what Oliver was selling. Mr. Gonzalez, she said, peering over her reading glasses, if this money was indeed a gift as your client claims, why did he tell Mr. Patterson it was for medical expenses? And why did he purchase a recreational vehicle instead of using it for the stated medical purpose? Oliver's lawyer mumbled something about miscommunication and stress-related decision-making, but you could tell even he knew his client was screwed. The injunction was granted, preventing Oliver from selling or transferring the boat until the case was resolved. And that's when Janet's investigation really got interesting. We found another victim, she told me during a phone call 3 weeks into the discovery process. Former coworker of your friend's named Derek Santos. Filed a complaint 6 months ago about an $8,000 loan that never got repaid. For what? Family emergency? Santos says your friend claimed his sister needed surgery for some kind of medical condition. Same playbook, smaller amount. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Because if there was one Derek Santos, there were probably others. And suddenly Oliver's pattern of financial emergencies over the years started making a lot more sense. The legal process dragged on for 8 months, which gave me plenty of time to think about 35 years of friendship and wonder how many red flags I'd ignored along the way. Discovery requests, depositions, settlement conferences that went nowhere because Oliver's story kept changing but never got more believable. His defense completely fell apart when Janet demanded medical records and treatment documentation. Turns out it's pretty hard to prove you spent $35,000 on cancer treatment when you can't produce a single medical bill, insurance claim, or doctor's note. Oliver's lawyers tried to argue patient privacy, but Judge Martinez wasn't having it. If Mr. Gonzalez is claiming the money was used for legitimate medical expenses, she said during one particularly brutal hearing, then he can provide evidence of those expenses or admit he used the funds for other purposes. By month 6, Oliver's legal team was pushing hard for settlement, but I was done being reasonable, done being the understanding friend who overlooked problems for the sake of preserving relationships, done enabling someone who'd apparently been running cons on people for years while I convinced myself he was just having a string of bad luck. The final judgment came down on a Tuesday morning in March, full amount plus court costs, totaling $38,700. Judge Martinez also authorized seizure of the boat to satisfy the debt, since Oliver had somehow managed to burn through whatever money he had left fighting the lawsuit. Congratulations, Janet said as we walked out of the courthouse. You just won your first fraud case. Feels weird calling it winning when I had to sue my best friend to get my own money back. Former best friend, she corrected. And don't feel bad about it. People like him count on your decency to Protect them from consequences. 9 months after that first demand letter, I found myself standing in the marina parking lot at 7 in the morning, watching a professional repo team hook Oliver's boat to a trailer, while a sheriff's deputy made sure everything stayed civilized. Oliver showed up right as they were getting ready to move the boat, which was either terrible timing or a last-ditch attempt to create some kind of dramatic scene. He looked like he'd been up all night, clothes wrinkled and eyes red with the kind of exhaustion that comes from knowing you're completely screwed. "You can't do this," he shouted, loud enough that people on neighboring boats stopped their morning routines to watch the show. "That's my boat. I bought it with my own money." Actually, the deputy said in the bored tone of someone who'd supervised 1,000 repo jobs. According to this court order, it was purchased with fraudulently obtained funds, making it subject to seizure. Oliver's eyes found mine across the parking lot, and for a second I saw something that might have been genuine hurt, like he couldn't understand how I'd taken things this far over money. 35 years, Jaden," he called out. 35 years of friendship, and you're going to destroy it over this?" "You destroyed it the day you lied to me," I called back. "I just made it official." The boat disappeared onto the trailer with the efficiency of people who did this for a living, and Oliver stood there looking like someone had just repossessed his entire identity, which, in a way, they had. "This isn't over," he said as the repo truck pulled away. "You think you've won something, but you have no idea what you've started. I'm going to make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are." And there it was. The threat I'd been expecting since the day I first called a lawyer. Because guys like Oliver don't just accept consequences, they make sure everyone else pays for holding them accountable. 2 weeks later, I stood in the parking lot of a boat dealership across town, shaking hands with a retired insurance adjuster named Frank, who was buying the boat for his grandson's 18th birthday. $32,000, which was $3,000 under market value, but enough to cover my loan plus court costs. "Boy's been saving up for 2 years to buy something like this," Frank told me as we finished the paperwork. "Works at a marina all summer, been dreaming about having his own boat. He'll take good care of it," I said, and actually meant it. The boat was going to someone who'd earned it and would appreciate it, instead of some con artist who'd stolen the money to buy toys he couldn't afford. Frank handed me a cashier's check with more zeros than I'd seen in my bank account since before the divorce, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. The satisfaction of a problem actually getting solved instead of just getting worse. The feeling lasted exactly until I got home and found 17 missed calls on my phone. Oliver had apparently spent the last 48 hours calling everyone we'd ever known, spinning some sob story about how I'd stolen his boat over a personal loan and destroyed our friendship out of jealousy and greed. My phone was buzzing with confused texts from people asking for my side of the story, concerned messages from family members, and notifications that I'd been tagged in some kind of social media post about fake friends who abandon you in your darkest hour. I sat in my apartment that night, staring at the cashier's check on my kitchen table, while my phone continued buzzing with messages from people I hadn't talked to in years, all asking variations of the same question. How could you do this to your best friend? The money was back in my account, the legal battle was won, and my bank balance finally looked sustainable again. But as I watched my phone light up with another incoming call from a number I didn't recognize, I realized Oliver had been right about one thing. This wasn't over. It was just getting started. The first call came at 6:30 the next morning, which should have been my first warning that Oliver wasn't planning to go down quietly. My mother's ringtone dragged me out of the first decent sleep I'd had in months, and her voice sounded like she'd been crying. "Jaden, honey, I need to ask you about something." The way she said it made my stomach drop before she even got to the actual question. "Oliver called me last night. He was very upset." I sat up in bed and rubbed my eyes, already knowing this conversation was going to suck. "What did he tell you?" "He said you stole his boat." Her voice was heavy with disappointment, but also confusion, like she was trying to solve a puzzle that didn't quite fit together. "He said his mother is dying of cancer, and you took advantage of his desperation to steal something that belonged to him." "Mom, that's not what happened." "He was crying, Jaden, really crying. I've known that boy since he was 7 years old, and I've never heard him sound so broken." She paused, and I could hear her struggling with something. "But the story doesn't quite sound like you either." And there it was. The thing about having a mother who'd known you for 42 years, she might be disappointed, but she also knew when something didn't add up. Oliver had been smart to call her first, to get his version out there while the emotions were fresh, but he'd underestimated how well she actually knew me. The money I loaned him was supposed to be for his mother's cancer treatment, I said carefully. Instead, he bought a boat. I had to sue him to get my money back. "You sued Oliver?" The shock in her voice was genuine. Honey, he's been like family to us for 35 years. Yeah, well, family doesn't usually commit fraud. The silence stretched out long enough that I thought we might have been disconnected. When she finally spoke again, her voice was smaller, more uncertain. He showed me pictures of the boat on his phone. It's beautiful. He said it was the only thing keeping him sane while his mother goes through treatment. His mother isn't sick, Mom. She had a minor skin cancer removed 3 years ago, and she's been fine ever since. Another long pause. I could practically hear her mental gears grinding as she tried to reconcile Oliver's tears with the mathematical impossibility of his story. I don't know what to believe, she finally admitted. This whole thing is just... It's not how I raised you boys to treat each other. Before I could respond, my phone started buzzing with an incoming text, then another, then 3 more in rapid succession. Mom, I need to go, but I promise you, I'm telling the truth about this. I hope so, honey. I really hope so. The texts were from my sister Addison, and they had the frantic energy of someone whose carefully managed world was suddenly spiraling out of control. What the hell is going on? Oliver just posted on Facebook about fake friends who abandon you. People are asking me if you really stole his boat. This is going to embarrass the whole family. Please tell me his story isn't true. I was still staring at her messages when my phone rang again. This time it was my older brother Marcus, and his voice had that careful, measured tone he used when he was trying not to take sides. Hey, so I got an interesting call this morning. Let me guess, Oliver? Yep, spent 20 minutes telling me what a heartless bastard you are. Marcus paused, and I could hear coffee brewing in the background. Want to tell me your side before I decide whether to punch you or punch him? You'd actually hear me out. You're my brother. Of course I'm going to hear you out. But I'm also going to tell you that if you really did screw over a guy whose mom is dying, I'm going to be extremely disappointed in you. I explained the whole thing again, from the original phone call to the wire transfer, to finding Oliver on the boat to the legal battle. Marcus listened without interrupting, which was both reassuring and terrifying, because it meant he was actually thinking about what I was saying, instead of just waiting for his turn to talk. So his mother isn't actually sick? Not unless you count having her feelings hurt when she finds out her son has been using her medical history to run cons on his friends. Jesus! Marcus was quiet for a long moment. You know what the fucked up part is? I was actually impressed that he called me. Thought it showed real loyalty to reach out to your family during a crisis. Yeah, well, turns out loyalty and manipulation can look pretty similar from the outside. My phone buzzed with another text. This one from a number I didn't recognize. Then another. Then my email started chiming with notifications from Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Oliver wasn't just calling people. Individually, he was launching a full-scale social media campaign. I opened Facebook first because apparently I hate myself. Oliver's post was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation, complete with a photo of him looking sad on the dock where his boat used to be. Sometimes you find out who your real friends are in the darkest moments of your life. When my mother was diagnosed with aggressive cancer, and I was facing the possibility of losing her, I thought I could count on my best friend of 35 years to understand that some things are more important than money. Instead, I learned that some people will destroy a lifetime of friendship over a business dispute. I'm heartbroken, but I refuse to let this bitterness consume me while my family needs me to be strong. Fike Friends. Family first, stay strong. The comments were already pouring in. People I hadn't talked to in years offering their support and expressing outrage at the unnamed friend who'd betrayed him. A few mutual friends had shared the post with their own commentary about loyalty and true friendship, but not everyone was buying it. Mixed in with the sympathy were a few comments that made me think Oliver's performance wasn't as convincing as he'd hoped. Wait, didn't your mom beat cancer like 3 years ago? I remember the celebration posts. This story seems like it's missing some details. Maybe we should hear both sides before jumping to conclusions. Those comments disappeared within minutes, deleted by Oliver faster than they'd appeared. But screenshots live forever, and I saved every one of them. My phone rang again. This time it was Danny from my weekly poker game, and his voice was awkward in the way that meant he was delivering bad news. Hey man, so about tomorrow night. Let me guess, game's canceled. Look, it's not personal. It's just that Oliver's been calling around, and some of the guys are uncomfortable with the whole situation. Nobody wants to take sides, you know? Right. Nobody wants to take sides, so they take his side by default. That's not fair, isn't it? I was getting tired of being reasonable about this. Half these guys have known me for 5 years. They've seen me lose money gracefully, cover for people when they're short on chips, and drive them home when they've had too much to drink. But one sob story from Oliver, and suddenly I'm persona non grata. Danny was quiet for a moment. You really didn't steal this boat? I repoed my own money after he committed fraud. There's a difference. If you say so. Look, maybe we can start the game back up in a few weeks after things cool down. After he hung up, I sat staring at my phone and wondering how many other conversations like that were happening across town. How many people were getting calls from Oliver, hearing his version of events, and deciding it was safer to distance themselves from me than risk getting involved in the drama. The answer came faster than I expected. Over the next 2 hours, my phone turned into a weapon of social destruction. 3 more mutual friends called to get my side of the story, but their tone suggested they'd already made up their minds. 2 college friends sent carefully worded texts expressing their disappointment without actually accusing me of anything specific. And my ex-wife called. Rachel. I answered on the second ring, partly because I was curious what Oliver had told her, and partly because I was a glutton for punishment. What the hell is wrong with you? Her voice was sharp with the particular kind of anger that came from feeling betrayed by someone she'd once trusted. Oliver called me crying about how you stole his boat while his mother is dying. And you believed him? I don't know what to believe anymore. But it sounds exactly like the kind of controlling, vindictive thing you used to do to me when you decided I was wrong about something. That hit harder than I expected. Because Rachel wasn't entirely wrong. I had been controlling during our marriage, just not in the way Oliver was claiming. I'd controlled information, controlled problems, controlled solutions, all in the name of protecting her from stress. But I'd never been vindictive. This isn't about control, Rachel, it's about fraud. Is it? Or is it about you being so obsessed with money that you'll destroy someone's life over a loan between friends? He lied to me about his mother having cancer. He used that lie to steal $35,000 from me. How is that not fraud? Maybe he was desperate. Maybe he made a mistake and didn't know how to fix it without losing face. I felt something snap inside me. Something that had been holding together through months of legal battles and financial stress and now weeks of character assassination. You know what, Rachel, you're right. This is exactly like our marriage. Just like then, you're taking someone else's word over mine without bothering to look at the evidence. Just like then, you've decided I'm the villain before hearing the whole story. And just like then, you're going to realize you were wrong after it's too late to take back the damage. The silence on her end was deafening. Maybe Oliver and I deserve each other, she said finally. Maybe we're both victims of your need to always be right. She hung up before I could respond, which was probably for the best because I was about to say something that would have made the whole conversation worse. But the hits kept coming. My work email was filling up with meeting requests that felt suspiciously like damage control, colleagues wanting to check in about some undefined issue they'd heard about. My gym partner Mike sent a text asking if I wanted to grab coffee and talk, which was the first genuinely supportive message I'd received all day. At the office, conversation stopped when I walked into rooms. Cheryl from accounting gave me a look that was equal parts pity and concern, like I was a wounded animal she didn't know how to help. Brad from IT made a point of mentioning that he'd seen some drama on social media, but wasn't sure what to make of it, which was his way of offering me a chance to defend myself. Only my close work friends remained unaffected. Jennifer brought me coffee without being asked and didn't mention any of the social media drama, while Tom made a joke about how Oliver always seemed like a used car salesman. That made me laugh for the first time in days. But the worst part wasn't the people who'd turned against me, or even the people who were unsure what to believe. The worst part was realizing how effectively Oliver had weaponized our entire social network. He'd identified every relationship I valued and contaminated it with doubt, confusion, and conflicting loyalties. By evening, I was emotionally exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. I sat in my apartment with my phone finally quiet, staring at the cashier's check on my kitchen table that represented everything I'd fought to get back. The money was there, the legal battle was won. But somehow I felt more defeated than I had when Oliver first disappeared with my loan. My phone buzzed one more time. A text from Mike, my gym partner. Hey man, heard there's some drama going around about you. Don't know the details and don't need to. Just wanted you to know I'm not interested in gossip and you're still welcome to spot me on bench press tomorrow if you want to talk. Then another text, this one from my neighbor Mrs. Chen, who was probably 75 and had never texted anyone in her life. Jaden, my granddaughter, showed me how to use this phone thing. I don't know what's happening with your friend, but I know you. You helped me carry groceries for 2 years and never asked for anything back. Some people are good and some people are not. You are good. And finally, a message from my college roommate Dave, who lived 3 states away and had probably never even met Oliver. Saw some weird posts online mentioning you. Don't know what's going on, but wanted you to know I remember the guy who drove 8 hours to help me move and wouldn't take gas money. Character doesn't change. Hang in there. I stared at those 3 messages for a long time, feeling something loosening in my chest that I hadn't realized was clenched tight. Because maybe Oliver's campaign was effective, but it wasn't perfect. Maybe most people were willing to believe the loudest voice, but not everyone. The people who really knew me weren't swayed by a Facebook post and some manipulative phone calls. They knew who I was when nobody was watching, when there was nothing to gain from being decent. I sat back in my chair and looked around my cramped apartment with its secondhand furniture and water-stained ceiling. Everything in my life had gotten smaller over the past year, my living space, my bank account, my social circle. But maybe that wasn't entirely a bad thing. Maybe I was finally seeing which relationships were built on something solid and which ones were just social convenience. My phone stayed quiet for the rest of the evening, but I wasn't waiting for it to ring anymore. Let Oliver make his calls and post his sob stories. Let him turn mutual acquaintances against me with his performance art. The people who mattered knew better. And for the first time since this whole nightmare started, that felt like enough. The thing about Oliver's reputation campaign was that it had one major flaw. It made me angry enough to stop being passive about the whole situation. I spent the first few days after his social media blitz feeling like I was drowning in other people's opinions. Every phone call, every text, every awkward conversation at work felt like I was defending myself against charges I shouldn't have had to address. But somewhere around day 4, when my cousin sent me a concerned message asking if I was going through some kind of financial crisis, something shifted. I was done explaining myself to people who'd rather believe a Facebook post than ask for facts. And I was definitely done letting Oliver control the narrative while he sailed around on my money. So I did what I do best when life gets complicated. I made a spreadsheet. Not for my finances this time, but for every person Oliver and I had known together over the past 35 years. College friends, co-workers from his various jobs, people from our old neighborhood, mutual acquaintances from parties and barbecues and poker games. If Oliver was running this sophisticated of a manipulation campaign, chances were I wasn't his first victim. Janet had done excellent work during the legal discovery process, but lawyers focus on what they can prove in court. They'd found Derek Santos through official channels because he'd filed a complaint. But how many other people had Oliver scammed who never bothered with lawyers or police reports? How many had stayed quiet out of embarrassment or uncertainty about their legal options? I started with Facebook because apparently I'm a glutton for digital punishment. Oliver's friends list was a treasure trove of names I recognized, people we'd gone to college with or worked alongside during his brief tenure at various companies. I began reaching out carefully, crafting messages that sounded casual but opened the door for bigger conversations. Hey, saw some social media drama with Oliver recently. Hope you're staying out of the mess. How have you been? Most people responded with polite small talk. A few mentioned they'd seen Oliver's posts and offered vague sympathy about difficult situations without taking sides. But every now and then, someone's response had an edge to it that made me think they knew more than they were saying. That's how I found Sarah Martinez. I remembered her vaguely from college. She'd been in Oliver's sociology class and had joined our group for pizza a few times. Junior year. We'd never been close friends, but she'd always seemed nice enough. When I reached out to her, her response came back within hours. Hi, Jaden. Actually, I've been following the situation on social media and wanted to reach out to you myself. Would you be willing to talk on the phone? I think you should know you're not the first person Oliver has done this to. My stomach dropped, but not in the bad way I'd gotten used to. This felt different. This felt like validation. We talked for 2 hours. 5 years ago, Oliver had called Sarah in tears about his sister's emergency appendectomy. The surgery had complications, he'd explained, and she needed a second operation that insurance wouldn't cover. He needed $8,000 immediately or his sister might die. Sarah, who'd just received a bonus at work and had always remembered Oliver as a sweet guy from college, wired him the money that same day. 2 weeks later, she saw Oliver's vacation photos from Las Vegas on Instagram. Expensive restaurants, VIP club access, hotel suites with city views. When she called to ask about the money, Oliver got defensive and claimed the Vegas trip was a mental health break his family had insisted he take after the trauma of his sister's medical crisis. I felt like an idiot for even questioning it, Sarah told me. I mean, who lies about their sister having surgery? But the math didn't add up. And when I pressed him for details about repayment, he started getting nasty. The nastiness escalated quickly. Oliver began calling their mutual friends, explaining that Sarah was harassing him during his family's medical crisis. He painted her as heartless and money-obsessed, someone who couldn't understand that some things were more important than debt repayment. Within a month, Sarah found herself excluded from group gatherings and tagged in social media posts about fake friends who abandon you when life gets difficult. I stopped asking for the money back because I couldn't handle the social fallout, she admitted. It was easier to write off $8,000 than deal with being painted as the villain in a sob story. But here's the thing about Sarah that Oliver had underestimated. She worked in data analysis for an insurance company. Pattern recognition was literally her job. I've been watching his social media for years, waiting to see if he'd do it to someone else, she said. The posts about your situation looked exactly like what he did to me. Same emotional manipulation, same victim narrative, same way of turning people against you when you fight back. After we hung up, I stared at my laptop screen for a long time, feeling something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not hope that I'd get my money back. That ship had already sailed. Hope that I wasn't crazy, that my instincts about Oliver's lies had been correct all along. If Sarah was right about a pattern, then there had to be others. I went back to my spreadsheet, with renewed purpose. This time, I wasn't just reaching out for casual conversation, I was conducting an investigation. The next breakthrough came from Marcus Rodriguez, who'd worked with Oliver at a pharmaceutical sales company 3 years ago. Marcus had been reluctant to talk at first, but when I explained what had happened with Sarah, his entire demeanor changed. Holy shit, he said when I called him. He got you too? Oliver had borrowed $12,000 from Marcus for his mother's experimental cancer treatment. Same playbook, different victim. Marcus had been suspicious when Oliver showed up to work the next week, driving a brand new BMW, but Oliver explained it was a lease he'd signed before his mother's diagnosis and couldn't get out of without ruining his credit. I kept asking for updates about his mom's treatment, Marcus told me, but every time I brought it up, he'd get emotional and say it was too painful to talk about. Eventually, I stopped asking because I felt like an asshole for pressing a guy whose mother was dying. Marcus never got his money back either. When he finally demanded repayment 6 months later, Oliver had already quit the company, claiming he needed to focus on his family situation. By the time Marcus realized he'd been scammed, Oliver was working somewhere else and had blocked his phone number. The pattern was becoming sickeningly clear. Oliver didn't just steal money, he stole emotional labor. He made his victims feel guilty for asking legitimate questions, turned their compassion into a weapon against them, and used their decency to protect himself from consequences. Over the next few weeks, I found 3 more victims. Jennifer Walsh, a former neighbor, $7,000 for his father's emergency heart surgery. The money went toward a trip to Cabo San Lucas. David Kim, a college fraternity brother, $4,000 for urgent car repairs after an accident. Oliver used it to buy a Rolex. Andrea Foster, his former supervisor at a marketing firm, $15,000 for his grandmother's nursing home bills. She later found out he'd spent it on a motorcycle. Each story followed the same template. Fabricated emergency, emotional manipulation, expensive purchase, social retaliation when questioned. And each victim had stayed quiet, convinced they were the only ones stupid enough to fall for his lies. But the most disturbing discovery came when I tracked down Oliver's elderly neighbor through property records and voter registration databases. Mrs. Eleanor Chen was 83 years old and had lived next to Oliver's apartment building for 6 years. When I called her, pretending to be updating emergency contact information for Oliver's employer, she was eager to talk. "Oh, that poor boy," she said in a voice that trembled with age and concern. I felt so terrible for him when his mother got sick again. Cancer is such a horrible disease. My blood turned to ice. Again? Well, she beat it the first time, a few years back. But when it came back and spread, Oliver was just devastated. I couldn't say no when he asked for help with her medical bills. Mrs. Chen had loaned Oliver $12,000 8 months ago. She'd been asking about repayment for weeks, but Oliver kept avoiding her, parking around the corner and using his building's back entrance so he wouldn't have to face her in the hallway. "I don't want to be pushy," she told me, "but I'm on a fixed income, and that money was most of my emergency savings. I just want to know when I might see it back." I felt sick. This wasn't just fraud anymore, it was elder abuse. Mrs. Chen's voice was so hopeful, so trusting, that I wanted to drive to her house immediately and write her a check myself. Instead, I did something that felt both necessary and horrible. I started investigating Oliver's mother. If Oliver was lying about current medical emergencies, what were the chances his mother was actually sick at all? I'd been taking his word about her cancer diagnosis for months, but I'd never actually verified it. And if I'd learned anything from this nightmare, it was that Oliver's word was worth exactly nothing. I started with social media because people Oliver's mother's age treated Facebook like a public diary. Maria Gonzalez's profile wasn't hard to find, and her privacy settings were minimal. What I discovered made me want to put my fist through my laptop screen. 3 years ago, Maria had posted regularly about her cancer treatment, but it wasn't the aggressive, experimental treatment Oliver had described. According to her own posts, she'd had a small spot of skin cancer removed from her shoulder and had received the all clear from her doctors within 2 months. Cancer-free and feeling grateful, she'd posted in July 3 years ago, along with a photo of herself gardening. Thank you to everyone who supported me through this scary time. Looking forward to many more years of planting flowers and spoiling my grandchildren. The posts since then showed a healthy, active woman. Photos from her grandson's birthday party last month, updates about her book club meetings, pictures of vacation trips with her sister. There was absolutely nothing suggesting ongoing health problems, experimental treatments, or medical emergencies requiring tens of thousands of dollars. But I needed more than social media posts to be sure, so I did something that felt like crossing a line, but which Oliver's behavior had made necessary. I reached out to Carmen Santos, a mutual family friend whose daughter had gone to school with Oliver's niece. Carmen had always been friendly at family gatherings, and she maintained relationships with both families through their kids' continued friendship. I called her on a Wednesday evening, keeping my voice casual and concerned. "Hey, Carmen, it's Jaden Patterson, Oliver's friend. I wanted to ask you something privately." "Oh, hi." "Jaden, of course, what's going on?" "I've been worried about Maria, Oliver's mom. He told me she was going through some really aggressive cancer treatment, and I wanted to send flowers or maybe a care package. But I don't want to intrude if she's having a bad day. How's she been doing lately?" The silence on Carmen's end lasted long enough that I thought we'd been disconnected. "Jaden," she said finally, her voice careful. "I had lunch with Maria 2 weeks ago. She's perfectly fine. She's been healthy for years ever since that little skin cancer scare." "What exactly did Oliver tell you?" My hands were shaking as I explained the situation. Carmen listened without interrupting, but I could hear her sharp intake of breath when I mentioned the $35,000. "There's no experimental treatment," she said when I finished. "No medical bills, no emergency. Maria's been worried about Oliver because he's been buying expensive things she knows he can't afford, but she has no idea where the money's coming from." And there it was. The final piece of Oliver's elaborate lie, crumbling like everything else he'd built his manipulation on. I sat in my apartment that night, staring at the notes I'd compiled over weeks of investigation. 7 victims that I'd found, possibly more I hadn't tracked down yet. Amounts ranging from $4,000 to $15,000 plus the $35,000 he'd stolen from me. Conservative estimate, Oliver had defrauded trusting friends out of at least $75,000 over the past 5 years. All of it based on fabricated emergencies, fake medical crises, and emotional manipulation. All of it spent on luxuries while his victims struggled to pay bills or rebuild their emergency savings. And through it all, he'd maintained his image as a charming, unlucky guy who just needed a little help from his friends. The worst part wasn't even the money. The worst part was realizing that Oliver's mother, the woman whose fictional suffering had been used to exploit my emotions and everyone else's, was a healthy, happy grandmother who had no idea her son was using her medical history to run elaborate cons on people who cared about him. I closed my laptop and looked around my cramped apartment, thinking about all the victims who'd stayed silent out of shame or fear. Thinking about Mrs. Chen counting her dwindling savings. Thinking about Sarah, who'd been excluded from friend groups for having the audacity to ask for her money back. Oliver wasn't just a thief. He was a predator who weaponized human decency against the people stupid enough to trust him. And tomorrow, I was going to make sure everyone knew it. I started making calls at 7 the next morning, because apparently righteous anger is an excellent alarm clock. Sarah Martinez picked up on the second ring, her voice still groggy with sleep, but sharpening quickly when I explained what I had in mind. "You want to confront him? Publicly?" she asked. "In front of mutual friends?" "I want to give him exactly what he's been giving us," I said, pacing around my cramped kitchen while my coffee brewed. A performance in front of people whose opinions matter to him. Except this time, the audience gets to see some actual evidence. The plan came together faster than I'd expected. Sarah knew Marcus Rodriguez from college, and Marcus was still in touch with Andrea Foster from their old marketing job. Within 2 hours, I had 4 victims willing to participate, and a growing list of mutual friends who'd received Oliver's manipulation calls, but weren't entirely convinced by his sob story. The key was finding the right mutual friend to set the trap. Someone Oliver trusted. Someone who could sell the setup without arousing suspicion. That turned out to be Danny Walsh. Yes, Jennifer's husband, which created its own awkward dynamic. But Danny had been growing increasingly uncomfortable with Oliver's recent behavior. The whole thing felt wrong, Danny admitted when I called him. Oliver's been pushing really hard for people to take sides, and that's not usually how friend group drama works. Plus, Jen told me about the money situation after you and I talked. Danny's plan was simple and brilliant. He'd call Oliver and suggest that some of the friend group wanted to meet at Rossetti's, our usual spot for poker nights and birthday dinners, to hear Oliver's side of the story and show support during this difficult time with his mother's treatment. Make it sound like a sympathy gathering where Oliver could play victim to a captive audience. He'll come, Danny predicted. He's been working so hard to control the narrative. There's no way he'll pass up a chance to solidify his version of events. The restaurant meeting was set for Friday evening, which gave me 3 days to coordinate with the other victims and prepare my presentation. Because yes, I was treating this like a business presentation, complete with documentation and exhibits. Some habits die hard. Sarah agreed to drive up from Columbus. Marcus could make it after work. Andrea had to bring her boyfriend for moral support, which was fine since we needed witnesses anyway. Mrs. Chen was too elderly and fragile for this kind of confrontation, but she'd given me permission to share her story. I spent Thursday night organizing everything into a folder that looked like it belonged in a courtroom. Screenshots of text messages, bank transfer records, boat registration documents, social media posts with timestamps. Every piece of evidence I'd gathered during months of legal battles and weeks of investigation, arranged in chronological order for maximum impact. Friday evening, I arrived at Rossetti's 30 minutes early and claimed a large corner table that would accommodate our group, while keeping the conversation relatively private. The restaurant was busy enough that we wouldn't stand out, but not so crowded that Oliver could disappear into background noise if things got uncomfortable. Sarah showed up first, looking nervous but determined. She'd brought printouts of her own evidence, bank records and screenshots that mirrored mine, but with different amounts and dates. I haven't seen him in person since college, she said, arranging her papers with the precision of someone who analyzed data for a living. This feels surreal. Marcus arrived next, followed by Andrea and her boyfriend. Danny had positioned himself across the restaurant with 3 other mutual friends, who thought they were just having dinner and observing the reconciliation between Oliver and me. He's here, Sarah said quietly, nodding toward the entrance. Oliver walked into Rossetti's like he owned the place, confident and smiling with the air of someone attending his own victory party. He was dressed for success. Expensive shirt, perfectly styled hair, that easy charm that had fooled all of us for so long. When he spotted our table, his expression shifted for just a moment. Confusion, maybe calculation, before settling back into his practiced, concerned friend mask. "Jaden," he said as he approached, his voice carrying just the right note of hurt bewilderment. "I have to say, I'm surprised you're here. After everything that's happened." "Sit down, Oliver," I said calmly, gesturing to the empty chair across from me. "These people wanted to hear your side of the story." He sat, but his eyes were scanning the faces around the table, trying to place them. Sarah he recognized immediately. His smile flickered when he saw her. Marcus took him a moment longer. Andrea he clearly didn't remember at all. "I'm sorry," he said to the group, turning on that megawatt charm. "I don't think we've all met. I'm Oliver Gonzalez, and I appreciate you wanting to hear my perspective on this unfortunate situation between Jaden and me." "Oh, we've met," Sarah said with a smile that could cut glass. "Sarah Martinez, sociology class senior year. You borrowed $8,000 from me for your sister's emergency appendectomy." The color drained from Oliver's face so fast, I thought he might pass out right there at the table. "That was 5 years ago," he said quickly. "Completely different situation, Sarah. I thought we'd work that out." "When?" Marcus interrupted. "When exactly did you work it out? Because I never got my $12,000 back either, remember me? Marcus Rodriguez, pharmaceutical sales? Your mother's cancer treatment?" Oliver's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. This wasn't going according to his script at all. "Look," he said, his voice rising slightly, "I don't know what Jaden told you people, but there's obviously been some kind of misunderstanding." I opened my folder. "Let me help clear up the misunderstanding," I said, pulling out the first set of documents. "These are screenshots of text messages you sent to different people, all claiming different emergencies on overlapping dates. I laid them out like playing cards. Sarah's sister's appendectomy on March 15th, Marcus's mother's cancer treatment on March 18th, Jennifer's father's heart surgery on March 22nd, all requesting money for fabricated medical emergencies within the same week. March was a busy month for family medical crises, I observed. Statistically improbable, you might say. Oliver stared at the documents, his confident facade cracking like ice in the sun. You can't just ambush people like this. This is harassment." Is it harassment when victims share their experiences? Andrea asked sweetly. Because I'd love to share mine. $15,000 for your grandmother's nursing home bills. Except you used it to buy a motorcycle. And I'd like to know about my $8,000, Sarah added. Since your sister's appendectomy apparently paid for your Vegas vacation? The breaking point came when I pulled out the final piece of evidence. The information I'd gathered about Oliver's mother. But here's my favorite part, I said, placing Maria Gonzalez's social media screenshots on the table. Your mother's current health status. Turns out she had a small spot of skin cancer removed 3 years ago and has been cancer-free ever since. No recent diagnosis, no experimental treatment, no medical bills requiring $35,000. Oliver stared at the photos of his healthy, happy mother gardening and attending book club meetings. When he looked up, something had changed in his eyes. The charm was gone, replaced by something desperate and ugly. You invaded my family's privacy, he said, his voice shaking with rage. You stalked my mother's social media accounts. You're sick. Your mother's Facebook is public, Oliver, and she posts regularly about how healthy and active she is. Kind of undermines your story about experimental cancer treatment, don't you think? You don't understand what it's like. He exploded, loud enough that nearby tables turned to stare. You've always had everything handed to you. Good job, stable income, family money to fall back on. Some of us have to work harder just to get by. So you decided to work harder at fraud? Marcus asked. I deserve good things too. Oliver's voice was getting louder, more desperate. Life hasn't been fair to me. My parents worked themselves to death trying to give me opportunities, and for what? So I could watch people like you coast through life while I struggle? Life's unfair, so you steal from your friends? Sarah's voice was ice cold. You traumatize an elderly woman by lying about your mother's cancer? She's fine. Mrs. Chen is fine. She has plenty of money. She doesn't even need it. The admission hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Oliver had just confirmed another victim, another lie, another betrayal. You're insane, he continued, looking around the table at faces that had gone from sympathetic to disgusted. All of you, this is a conspiracy. You're trying to destroy me because you can't stand that I'm successful. Successful at what? I asked. Fraud? Because you're definitely successful at that. Oliver stood up so fast his chair nearly tipped over. I'm calling my lawyer. This is entrapment or harassment or something. You can't just gang up on people like this. Actually, we can, Andrea said calmly. It's called sharing experiences. You should try it sometime instead of making them up. Oliver's final explosion was volcanic. He screamed about privacy violations and conspiracies, accused us of ruining his life out of jealousy, and claimed he deserved every penny because we were all too privileged to understand real struggle. The entire restaurant went quiet as he threatened lawsuits and police reports and promised to expose us all as vindictive liars. But the most beautiful part was watching our mutual friends' faces as Oliver's mask completely disintegrated. Danny's expression went from confused to horrified as the man he'd known for years revealed himself as someone else entirely. The three friends at Danny's table were recording parts of the meltdown on their phones, capturing Oliver's admission about Mrs. Chen and his rants about deserving other people's money. Oliver stormed out of Rossetti's like a tornado of wounded narcissism, shouting over his shoulder about revenge and legal consequences and how we'd all be sorry for crossing him. The restaurant slowly returned to its normal volume level, but our table remained silent for a long moment. Then Marcus started laughing. Holy shit, he said. He actually said he deserves the money because life is unfair. Out loud, in front of witnesses. Did you see Danny's face? Sarah asked, glancing over at our mutual friend who was still staring at our table in shock. I think Oliver just lost his last sympathetic audience. Andrea's boyfriend, who had been quiet through the whole confrontation, shook his head in amazement. That was either the most therapeutic thing I've ever witnessed or the most terrifying. Possibly both. I looked around the table at these people Oliver had victimized. All of us finally able to speak truth to the lies we'd been carrying for years. For the first time since this nightmare started, I felt something I'd almost forgotten existed. Justice. Not the legal kind that comes with court orders and restitution payments, but the human kind that comes from being believed, from having your reality validated by people who understand exactly what you've been through. So what happens now? Marcus asked. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recording app that had been running through Oliver's entire meltdown. Now we make sure this never happens to anyone else. Because watching Oliver's reputation crumble in real time wasn't just satisfying. It was necessary. And for once in this whole miserable situation, I was exactly where I needed to be, with exactly the right people doing exactly the right thing. The first call came that next Monday morning, and for once it wasn't someone wanting to tell me what a terrible person I was. Mr. Patterson, this is Detective Kim with the Columbus Police Department. I understand you might want to file a fraud report involving an Oliver Gonzalez. Sarah had followed through. She'd driven straight to her local police station after our dinner confrontation and filed a formal complaint, complete with all her documentation and screenshots of Oliver's Vegas vacation photos. The detective wanted to know if I'd be willing to come in and provide my evidence as well. Absolutely, I said, already mentally organizing the folder that had served me so well at Rossetti's. How many other victims have come forward? Including you and Ms. Martinez, we have 3 formal complaints so far. Mr. Rodriguez filed yesterday morning. 3 victims. That was just the people from our dinner who'd had the courage to go to the police. I thought about Mrs. Chen, 83 years old and probably too intimidated by the legal system to file reports. I thought about all the other people Oliver had scammed over the years who'd stayed quiet out of embarrassment or fear. Detective, there are more victims. I can provide you with contact information for at least 4 additional people, including an elderly woman Oliver defrauded of $12,000. The satisfaction in Detective Kim's voice was audible. We'd appreciate any information you can provide, Mr. Patterson. Patterns like this help us build stronger cases. I spent that afternoon at the police station laying out 2 years' worth of documentation like I was presenting to a board of directors. Bank records, text messages, social media screenshots, boat registration papers, legal filings from my civil case. Detective Kim took notes and asked smart questions, treating Oliver's lies like the criminal enterprise they actually were. This is unusually well documented, she said, flipping through my folder. Most fraud victims don't have this level of evidence. Most fraud victims probably aren't obsessive accountants going through a divorce, I said. I've been documenting everything since this started, partly for legal protection and partly because I'm apparently incapable of not making spreadsheets. She laughed. Well, your spreadsheets are going to make this case a lot easier to prosecute. Walking out of that police station felt different than walking out of the courthouse when I'd won my civil judgment. That had been about getting my money back. This was about making sure Oliver couldn't do it to anyone else. By Wednesday, Oliver's Facebook page had vanished entirely. His Instagram went dark. His LinkedIn profile disappeared. It was like he'd realized that social media, which had been his weapon of choice for reputation management, had become evidence of his crimes instead. The mutual friends started reaching out that same week, and those conversations were some of the most awkward of my life. Danny called first, his voice heavy with guilt and embarrassment. Jaden, I owe you an apology. A big one. After seeing Oliver lose his shit like that at dinner, I went back through some of his old posts and stories, and they don't add up. What gave it away? I asked, not bothering to hide my sarcasm. The part where he admitted to scamming an elderly woman? Or the part where he screamed about deserving other people's money? All of it. But mostly the way he talked about you. I've known you for 5 years, and you've never been the kind of person who'd steal from a friend. I should have trusted my own judgment instead of getting swept up in his drama. These conversations followed a pattern. Guilt, embarrassment, weak explanations about being caught in the middle, and promises that they should have known better. Part of me wanted to be magnanimous and understanding. The bigger part of me was still pissed off about being presumed guilty by people who claimed to be my friends. I appreciate the apology, I told each of them, but I need you to understand something. When you chose not to take sides, you were taking his side. When you canceled poker games and avoided my calls, you were telling me that 35 years of friendship meant less to you than avoiding awkward conversations. Some of them got defensive. A few hung up. But the ones who mattered, the ones whose friendships were worth salvaging, listened and accepted that they'd fucked up in ways that apologies couldn't entirely fix. My family was a different kind of complicated. Mom called on Thursday, her voice smaller and more uncertain than I'd heard since Dad died. Honey, I owe you an apology. Several apologies, actually. Just one will do, Mom. I should have believed you from the beginning. I should have trusted my own instincts about Oliver instead of letting his performance convince me you were the problem. She paused, and I could hear her struggling with something. The truth is, I always had doubts about some of his stories over the years. Little things that didn't quite add up. But I convinced myself I was being paranoid. What kind of things? The expensive gifts he'd bring to family dinners right after telling sob stories about money troubles. The way he'd change the subject whenever someone asked follow-up questions about his family situations. And that time 3 years ago when he claimed his mother was in the hospital. But I saw her at the grocery store the same day, looking perfectly healthy. I felt something twist in my stomach. You saw her at the grocery store? I mentioned it to him later, and he got flustered and said it must have been after she was discharged, but the timing didn't make sense. I should have said something then. My mother had known. Some part of her had always known Oliver was lying, but she'd chosen to ignore her instincts rather than confront the possibility that someone she'd welcomed into our family for decades was manipulating all of us. Why didn't you say anything? Because I didn't want to believe it. Because it was easier to give him the benefit of the doubt than face the fact that I'd been fooled for years. Her voice cracked. And because when you were going through your divorce, you seemed so angry and bitter that I thought maybe this was just more of that. Anger and bitter. That's how my own mother had seen me during the worst period of my life, when I was struggling to rebuild everything I'd lost. It hurt more than Oliver's betrayal in some ways, because I'd expected better from her. I understand why you doubted me, I said finally. But it really sucked to have my own family assume I was lying. I know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, honey. Addison's response was predictably different. She sent a text message instead of calling, because apparently confronting her mistakes required the emotional distance of written communication. I saw the police report in the local news online. I guess I was wrong about the situation. Still think you could have handled it better, but obviously Oliver has issues. Hope things work out. That was it. No real apology, no acknowledgement of how her reaction had added to the damage Oliver was trying to cause. Just a grudging admission that maybe she'd been wrong, followed immediately by criticism of how I'd handled being defrauded. I stared at that text for a long time before deciding not to respond. Some relationships weren't worth fighting to repair, but Marcus surprised me. He called that weekend and got straight to the point. I've been thinking about our conversation, and I realized I need to apologize for more than just believing Oliver's story. What do you mean? I mean, I've been a shitty brother for the past 2 years. When you were going through your divorce, I basically disappeared because I didn't want to deal with the drama. When you needed support, I made excuses about being busy with work. And when this Oliver situation started, my first instinct was to assume you'd done something wrong. This was not the conversation I'd expected from Marcus, who typically avoided emotional discussions like they carried communicable diseases. I think I know why I reacted that way, he continued. After Dad died, you became the family problem solver. You handled all the legal stuff, managed Mom's finances, dealt with the insurance companies. I got used to you having everything under control. So when your life fell apart, it scared me. If you couldn't keep it together, what did that say about the rest of us? Marcus, let me finish. I should have been helping you instead of judging you. And I should have trusted that my brother wouldn't steal from his best friend, regardless of what some manipulative asshole claimed. I had to pull over to the side of the road, because my vision was getting blurry. In 42 years of being Marcus's younger brother, I'd never heard him talk about emotions this directly. I want to help now, he said. Whatever you need for the legal stuff, character references, someone to talk to when this gets overwhelming. I'm here. I should have been here all along. That means a lot, I managed to say. More than you probably realize. Good. Because I'm also going to need your help processing the fact that I've been saying hello to a sociopath at family barbecues for 35 years. That's going to take some therapy. I laughed for the first time in weeks. Yeah, the family barbecues are going to be weird now. The legal proceedings moved like most legal proceedings. Slowly, with lots of paperwork and bureaucratic delays. But Detective Kim kept me updated on the investigation's progress, and the picture that emerged was even worse than I'd imagined. They'd tracked down 8 victims total, spanning 5 years of increasingly sophisticated fraud schemes. The total amount stolen was over $90,000, not counting the interest and fees that Oliver's victims had paid while struggling to cover the money he'd taken. He's definitely done this before, Detective Kim told me during one of our updates. The escalation pattern is textbook. He started small in college, learned what worked, and gradually increased the amounts as he got more confident. What happens next? The district attorney is charging him with multiple counts of fraud and theft by deception. Given the number of victims and the amounts involved, he's looking at serious prison time if convicted. But Oliver wasn't going quietly. Even with his social media accounts deleted, he was still trying to control the narrative through back channels. I learned this when Jennifer Walsh, Danny's wife and one of Oliver's victims, called to warn me about the latest campaign. He's been calling people and claiming you organized some kind of conspiracy against him, she said. Apparently, you're a vindictive ex-friend who convinced innocent victims to lie about him for revenge. Of course he is. The thing is, it's not working this time. People saw the video from the restaurant. They watched him admit to scamming Mrs. Chen and rant about deserving stolen money. It's hard to claim innocence after that kind of public meltdown. That video had become something of a legend in our social circle. Danny had posted portions of it on social media before taking it down, but not before several people had downloaded copies. Oliver's mask-off moment was preserved forever, available to anyone who wanted to see what he looked like when the charm finally failed. More importantly, people I barely knew started reaching out with their own Oliver stories. A woman from his high school who remembered him selling fake concert tickets senior year. A former coworker who'd caught him lying about sick days to get time off for vacation trips. A neighbor from his old apartment building who'd seen him throw away expensive electronics while claiming he couldn't afford rent. The pattern went back decades. Oliver hadn't become a con artist. He'd always been one. He'd just gotten better at it over time, and better at choosing victims who were too trusting or too isolated to compare notes. 6 months after the restaurant confrontation, Oliver was arrested. Detective Kim called to let me know they'd found him living under a false name in Arizona, working at a car dealership and apparently setting up new scams with his coworkers. "How did you find him?" I asked. Anonymous tip from someone who recognized him from wanted posters. Turns out he'd been using the same identity theft techniques on his new friends that he used on his old ones. The arrest made the local news, which created its own weird celebrity status for those of us who'd been victims. Reporters called asking for quotes about Oliver's manipulation techniques. A local television station wanted to do a segment on financial fraud warning signs. I declined most of the media attention, partly because I didn't want to relive the whole experience for entertainment value, and partly because the real satisfaction wasn't in public vindication. It was in the quiet knowledge that Oliver couldn't hurt anyone else. My financial situation stabilized faster than I'd expected. The boat sale had covered most of my losses, and when the court-ordered restitution from the criminal case came through, it included interest and legal fees that brought me ahead of where I'd started. For the first time in 2 years, the lien on my old house was fully satisfied, which meant I could actually sell it if I wanted to move forward instead of backward. The money felt different this time. Not like something I'd won or recovered, but like something I'd earned through the sheer stubborn refusal to let someone steal my reality along with my cash. I used part of it to hire a good therapist, because apparently surviving financial fraud and social manipulation requires some professional processing. Dr. Martinez, no relation to Sarah despite my initial moment of panic, specialized in trust and betrayal issues. Trauma from financial abuse is real trauma, she told me during one of our early sessions. You didn't just lose money. You lost your ability to trust your judgment about people, which affects every relationship going forward. How do I know if someone is trustworthy? I asked. Oliver fooled me for 35 years. My own family doubted me. How do I trust anyone after that? You start by trusting yourself. Your instincts about Oliver were correct. You knew something was wrong when he bought the boat instead of helping his mother. You knew his stories didn't add up. The problem wasn't your judgment. The problem was that you'd been conditioned to ignore your judgment in favor of giving him the benefit of the doubt. That became the theme of our sessions, learning to trust my own perceptions, instead of automatically deferring to other people's versions of reality. It sounds simple, but after decades of being the family peacekeeper and relationship fixer, learning to prioritize my own judgment over other people's comfort was harder than I'd expected. 24 months after Oliver first called me about his mother's fake cancer diagnosis, he stood in a courtroom and pleaded guilty to 7 counts of fraud and theft by deception. I wasn't there for the hearing. Detective Kim had warned me that seeing him might be more traumatic than satisfying, but she called afterward with the results. 2 years in prison plus full restitution to all victims, she said. The judge specifically mentioned the elderly victim in his sentencing remarks. He was not impressed with Mr. Gonzalez's pattern of targeting vulnerable people. 2 years felt both too long and not long enough. Too long because I'd already moved on and didn't need Oliver to suffer for my healing. Not long enough because 2 years couldn't undo the decades of manipulation or repair all the relationships he'd damaged with his lies. But it was enough to ensure he couldn't do this to anyone else for a while, and honestly, that mattered more to me than revenge. The final piece of rebuilding came 18 months later when I found an apartment that didn't feel like a punishment for my divorce. 2 bedrooms, actual closet space, a kitchen where 2 people could stand without bumping into each other. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine, and I'd earned it with money that hadn't been stolen or borrowed or begged from family members. Moving day was a Saturday in October, perfect fall weather that made everything feel like a new beginning. Marcus showed up with his truck and his girlfriend, who I'd never met but who immediately started organizing my books by subject instead of letting me throw them randomly into boxes. "Your brother told me about everything that happened," she said while we packed my kitchen. "I just want you to know that I think you handled it exactly right." "Thanks," I said, "though I'm not sure I handled anything right. I mostly just stumbled through it and got lucky. You trusted your instincts when everyone else told you not to. You fought for justice when it would have been easier to just walk away. That's not luck, that's character." I thought about that while we loaded furniture and boxes, about the difference between luck and character, between stumbling and choosing to keep moving forward. Maybe the past 2 years hadn't been about handling everything perfectly. Maybe they'd been about learning that I could handle imperfect situations and come out stronger. By evening, everything was unpacked, except for one box of random items that could wait until tomorrow. Marcus and his girlfriend had left for dinner, the utility companies had confirmed that everything was connected properly, and I was sitting in my new living room with a beer and a sense of accomplishment I hadn't felt in years. That's when my phone rang. "Jaden, how was the move?" Mike's voice was cheerful and familiar, unmarked by any of the awkwardness that had characterized so many of my relationships during the Oliver drama. Mike had been my gym partner through everything, the one friend who'd never asked for explanations or apologies, who'd just kept showing up for our workouts and treating me like nothing had changed. He'd listened when I needed a vent and changed the subject when I needed distraction, and somehow he'd always known which one I needed. "Move went great," I said. "Finally feels like I'm living somewhere instead of just camping out." "Perfect timing then. Sarah and I are making dinner tomorrow night. Nothing fancy, just burgers on the grill and whatever vegetables I can manage not to burn. You should come over, meet the infamous cooking skills you've heard so much about." Sarah was Mike's girlfriend of 6 months, a nurse who worked pediatric ER and had a laugh that could be heard from 3 rooms away. I'd met her a few times at the gym and liked her immediately. She was funny and direct and didn't treat me like a victim or a cautionary tale. "I'd love to," I said, surprised by how much I meant it. "What can I bring?" "Just yourself, and maybe low expectations for the vegetables." After we hung up, I looked around my new apartment and felt something I hadn't experienced in 2 years. Excitement about the future. Not relief that the past was over, not gratitude that I'd survived, but actual anticipation for what came next. The Oliver nightmare had taught me things I'd never wanted to learn about manipulation and betrayal, and the difference between real friends and social acquaintances. It had shown me which family relationships were built on genuine love and which ones were held together by habit and convenience. But more than that, it had taught me to trust my instincts, even when everyone else disagreed, to choose my own well-being over other people's comfort, and to recognize that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's destructive behavior. I'd lost a best friend, but I'd found out who my real friends were. I'd lost some family relationships, but the ones that remained were stronger and more honest. I'd lost my naive trust in people's good intentions, but I'd gained the confidence to trust my own judgment. My phone was resting on the coffee table, silent for once, not buzzing with crisis calls or manipulation attempts or demands for explanations I didn't owe. Tomorrow I'd have dinner with people who liked me for who I was instead of what I could give them, and for the first time in years that felt like exactly where I was supposed to be. The apartment was quiet, the kind of peaceful quiet that comes from being safe in your own space, surrounded by your own things, with your own life finally free from toxic manipulation. And for once, that was enough.